You know, I gotta stop making these announcements so early. It's been like 2 weeks since I last announced, or I first announced rather, that I would be making a reading comments, and here we are. But anyway, before we actually get to the overdue reading comments, I have a very special message from a very, very special guest. So I'd like you to listen to that, and then we'll continue with the video.
Go ahead, my son. Push the button. It is the key to unlocking our destiny.
So now that we got that out of the way, we can go into the first comment. That was written by Jeremy Nobbs. And I do know that this name does not match up with the tag that you're seeing on screen, but you can thank YouTube for that, because that was a change they made, I don't know, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, I'm not sure. Nobody asked for it. It has some use, but why don't you just display instead of the tag the actual name that the person picked? But that's a whole nother discussion. Anyway, let's get into this comment. For how much shade EA justly receives, the team that worked on CNC3 deserves all the praise they get, not just for creating great gameplay, but also great world building. The idea of splitting the world into zones, ranging from technological fortress nations to Mad Max-esque Borderlands to Tiberian scarred hellscapes, was absolutely brilliant in terms of all the scenarios and stories it could generate. Not flawless, of course. In my opinion, the red zones should have looked less dead and more alien like they did in Tiberian Sun, but I would have loved to have seen this world get explored further. Since EA has the series chained up in their basement, it's now up to the fans to keep the world alive. Well, first off, thank you very much for that comment, Jeremy. I do want to give praise to the CNC3 creative team. The creatives are always the ones that create the games, and then most of the time their creative vision gets stolen from them due to either budget cuts because the investors don't think it's a particularly profitable idea. So the fact that sometimes an actual good product gets out to the public is a miracle, which is something that I wish I had never learned, because if I had never learned that, I would be much less jaded when it comes to actually discussing gaming. But anyway, I do agree that the world building that this team put forth was great. Of course, not all of it was to be credited to them. Westwood created the Tiberian universe. They created the roots, and if you have ever created some kind of world, some kind of story, you would know how hard it is to actually start creating these concepts. But once you start creating them, one comes after the other. It's like unraveling this knot. Everything starts to make sense. The fact that you have 3 distinct landscapes, 3 distinct types of realities melded into one is absolutely fantastic. You can have so much variety in the stories that you're telling in the same universe, and the thing is, it makes sense. It helps explain the position of a person that joins GDI because they want to protect the actual world from Tiberium and the few places that are still untouched by it, and then it helps explain the person that lives in a yellow zone who thinks that GDI just got up and left them with nothing. Of course, it's not this simple. It's not as simple as the people in the yellow zone are the bad guys and the people in the blue zones are the bad guys. It's 2 different realities, and you work with what you're given. You don't always get a choice. It also helps explain the tragedy of the Forgotten. The people suffered mutations. And speaking of mutations, this part right here about the red zones having no alien life, no Tiberian life forms like they did in previous games. I agree, but in a certain way. Let me explain my position. In isolation, I love the red zones from Tib Wars. The feeling you get when you get into a red zone and you start hearing the sounds, the visuals of this desolate place, they're so different. I love it. They look like a different planet. Especially with the sounds and the way the planet looks, it doesn't look like Earth. But when you put Tib Wars and its red zones in context of the whole franchise, it doesn't make sense. The explanation, apparently, I read this some years ago, and there was a comment from a commenter, I think it was Mathelgar, I don't know if I'm remembering the name correctly. But the reason was that GDI apparently exterminated all the Tiberium-based life forms in the red zones, in the yellow zones, in the blue zones. To me, that doesn't make sense. You're telling me that this faction that doesn't have control of the planet, they can barely get a yellow zone to be transformed into a blue zone. They just managed that with New Eden. You're telling me that they have the capability to exterminate all life forms from the red zones? From the yellow zones controlled by Nod? I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I think you could certainly have a mix, that some red zones have nothing and some do, but this approach of either or, I don't think it works. It doesn't make sense. It's incongruent with the lore that was established before the game. And to the last part of your comment about the fans and their duty to keep the world alive, this has become true of every franchise out there. When you put a product out there, when you present a story, it no longer belongs to you. That now belongs to the fans. And if you're a creator and you actually have some appreciation for the fans that allow you to keep making such work, you will take that input into consideration. I'm not saying that you need to change everything because the fans want it, no, but you have to have your finger on the pulse of the fan base so that you know what they want, and that way you can actually create better stories. A good story doesn't mean that you follow what the fans want all the time, but it does mean that you meet their expectations for the high standards that you have set and the standards that the franchise has set. You need to play by the rules that you have created. You created the expectations on the first entry, so you need to play by it. But companies like these, that are looking for ever increasing profit margins, they're not going to care for what we want from the franchises. So, we don't need them. We will keep these franchises alive by making content about it that we like. And then hopefully, we will also have people that create their own franchises so that they can entertain the people that have been expunged from their fandoms. Once you make something that's so unfaithful to the actual franchise, you are effectively just kicking people out and leaving them with no other choice but to search for other art forms. It's not talked about, it's not super famous, but there's a lot of content from Command and Conquer that's being produced by the fans. More fun than what they could come up with today. So try to indulge in that, try to get into that, and try to create some content yourself. And if not, create your own art form so that you can entertain other people. It's our turn to start creating something ourselves. Okay, this comment is coming from Darth Scar, and he says, I got a few ideas for more of these ambiances. Travel with cultists, a dark room illuminated by screen blue lights as a small group of screen cultists either stand or kneel in the middle waiting for orders during a briefing before the battle. I'm assuming that's what you meant when you said lol, I'm not sure. With the sounds of them quietly chanting something with the occasional bug-like sounds from the mastermind parasites on their heads, along with other screen ambience. Idea number 2. Now that we have ambience of the harvesters, how about some ambience of the Tiberian fields themselves? Idea number 3. This one is slightly different. There's a standalone fan mod for Tiberian Sun called Twisted Insurrection, where the Brotherhood won at the end of the First War instead of GDI, and have gone on to take over most of the world, and have begun building and fortifying cities that have an almost cyberpunk vibe to them, and walling them off from the rapidly spreading Tiberium, which itself has seen a lot more fauna and flora mutations occurring than in the canon timeline. So in short, a civilian walled-off cyberpunk-esque city during a minor ion storm with the usual Tiberium creature ambiance in the distance, mixed with the normal sounds of a futuristic city and also not propaganda mixed in. Like I actually answered in the comment that I used to reply to you, I love these ideas. Traveler cultists, screen ambiances, something that's kind of unexplored. Their faction is mysterious by nature, so anything that explores them is something I'm all for. As for your second idea, we do have ambiances of the harvesters, but you only have seen 2. We're lacking a 3rd. That's all I'm gonna say. But sure, we can have ambiances that have Tiberian fields. I don't know that I'm gonna make an ambiance just dedicated to that Tiberian field. Because here's the thing. When I first started making ambiances, I just had planned 3. That was the yellow zone, the red zone, and the blue zone. I wanted to make those 3. After a year, I realized that I was severely limiting myself in terms of creativity by just sticking with those titles. So I started making it smaller. I started making it in a way that would allow me to actually create an ambiance that was more specific to a certain event, to a certain concept within the Tiberium universe. So for example, I plan on making ambiances for red zones in the future. Those will have Tiberium in them, fields even, but it will not be focused on it. As to your third idea, Tiberium, so this one is the one that I find most difficulty in answering because, like I stated in my previous comment, I want to make ambiances that are meant to fit into the current canon. So if Twisted Insurrection is non-canon, that is a problem. However, also like I said in my comment, I can make it work. Now, will it make sense for the Twisted Insurrection timeline? Probably not, but my objective is to make it make sense for the canon timeline. So let me figure it out, but just know that it's in the backlog, and I'll do my damnedest to make it work. So here we have the next comment made by Ewan Kidner. Great video, I'm glad you're using my ideas. You're quite welcome, sir. I have some suggestions. Life as a cyborg and life as a mutant. By the way, here's a story that you can use or just enjoy if you want.
This day, like any other, was just a 24-hour period in an endless Tiberian field, where every second felt like an hour, and every hour felt like a lifetime. Life was very uneventful for me. As a survivor, as a single being who has been altered by the effects of Tiberium, I do not feel discomfort, because I'm used to it. I feel the gases of Tiberium everywhere. Living in a Tiberium-filled area makes you rapidly get used to the harsh but stimulating environment, or you die trying. You don't feel pain in the crystal's presence after you are mutated. In fact, you start to become thankful of their presence, as it supports your life when you live in it for extended periods of time. I have always put my loyalty in the studying of the crystals, and I've always agreed with Nod's idea that it is the future. After being mutated by the crystals for so long, I began to understand the true future that Kane talked about. It truly is the way, and the life. GDI treats it like a disease, but no. They are the true cancer on this planet, denying the clearly superior future that sits right in front of them, destroying it and rejecting the very thing that they claim to believe in. Peace. These thoughts anger me. As I continue to walk through the Tiberium, I raise my hand and I put it on one of the crystals. My hand slides over the crystal as I continue walking forward. I feel the gas's effects intensify as I walk straight into a field of Tiberium vinifera. The hair around me feels warm and my heart feels like it's going through intense heartbeats. The blue crystals can be a bit potent, but nothing I can't handle. I walk out of the field and continue walking. After a few hours, I get to the top of a tall hill, and there I see it, in the distance, the threshold. I continue walking until I am really close. Nod should be here to finally pick me up after the weeks I have spent here. I will continue my work for the Brotherhood until all can truly understand the Tiberian future that I do, as is foretold by the Prophet. Glory to Kane.
You should pursue writing, Ewan. This is very in character for a not fanatic. But yeah, look, I am always happy to use people's suggestions, so if you have something to suggest, please write it in the comments. I encourage that. But to other points, you got here two suggestions, life as a cyborg and life as a mutant. I would like to explore these concepts. I have some ideas for how I could explore them, but in terms of factions, but not in terms of the individual, because how would you make that work? How could you sell that an ambiance is modeled around a mutant? It would make sense to tell a story about them. You know, you could have dialogue, you could have visual storytelling if it was an animated series, if it was a movie, a game even. But the ambiance about an individual, you know, I don't think that works. I mean, it kind of works if it's a faction, like for example the Marked of Kane or the Forgotten. But for an individual, I'm not sure. So thank you for your comment, Ewan. That was a great story. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And I'll get a professional voice actor next time to actually dramatize and read the dramatized version of this. This one comes from Rear Admiral Big Core. And he says,
Fields of green. We must not wander too far. The crystals are calling. It is time for a harvest. We need more. Yes, more Tiberium. This land grows rich. Help! The harvest is in danger! Haul it back, hurry!
we have another comment here from Jeremy Knobs. You're welcome. You got featured in this video 2 times, but he says, nothing unusual here, just an odd harvester operator getting their smoke break cut short by some crappy weather. This is what I mean when people have their own interpretations of your work after you put your work out there. I actually replied to this comment saying that it was actually meant to be a full mug of hot coffee. That's the smoke you were seeing inside the Nod Harvester. People interpret it as a smoke, as a cigarette or a cigar. I don't blame you all. It's your art form now. I just posted it, so you're welcome to interpret the content however you wish. So I have this comment right here, and this comment was posted on my Life in Temple Prime a couple of months ago, and I love this comment. When we talk about world building and storytelling, this is it. This is what people that love a franchise and love storytelling can do, because they're passionate. K98 underscore Zoc underscore TV said,
Alright. Do you want to know how I'm here? Okay. So, this is a confession. Our induction into the Nod Armed Forces. My younger brother and I, we were born in a yellow zone in Europe. I cannot disclose more information about the exact area on the comms. We were born in the early 2000s and several years and wars later, the globalists with their ill-gotten monopoly alongside with their military-industrial complex formed GDI for the supposed greater good. This allowed them to cordon off several country-sized areas, the blue zones, without any kind of opposition. Those privileged few got a better deal. However, that meant most of mankind was cut off from possibilities, supplies, energy, shelter, and most importantly, hope. The clash between GDI and Nod during the Second Tiberian War hit our area particularly hard. My brother and I, we lost our complete family. And in the mid-2030s, we were dependent on the goodwill of the Nod welfare. Before clarity, we joined some local warlord and we ruled the area. We could rebuild some of the infrastructure at the most basic level. But this was thwarted every time by the most ruthless forces. The GDI scum. For the longest time, we did not want to join the Brotherhood, and by us, I mean the local population in the ruins of this bigger city. But Kane, the Prophet, is persistent. His broadcasts reached us through various devices, and his confessors walked the streets and brought us not only hope for a better future, but also supplies and food. Only the Brotherhood cared for the people outside of the Blue Zones. My brother, me, we eventually joined the Brotherhood as runners in the zone. Our job was to deliver messages and small goods. GDI's monopoly on SAT surveillance meant that Nod needed and needs to rely on physical runners. After we did this for about 1 to 2 years, our local Nod agent offered us to join the Nod armed forces, and we took the opportunity. Soon after, we got transferred to some military education camp, the infamous End of Nod. This was where we had to report in. After very harsh training and intense exercises, we earned the opportunity to prove our faith in the Aerial Nod Militia Regiment YX5, or Anamir YX5 for short. It did not take a long time until our Anamir unit turned against the local warlord. Maybe... maybe I am not proud of this betrayal. But indeed, we saw and see the bigger, the global picture. All the opposition against GDI has to unite and be led by Kane. Otherwise, the technical and logistical advantage of the Blue Zones can handle every single Yellow Zone one by one. As for my brother, he made his career serving under the Scorpion Tail, and finally became Tank Platoon leader after the siege of Sarajevo during the Third Tiberium War. Miraculously, I survived long enough as well, and I'm currently part of a special unit, but I can't share much. What I can say is that we will proudly fight for Kane, for the Brotherhood, and for all the oppressed people on the globe. And when necessary, when it becomes necessary, we will die for our goals. And so will our enemy.
Okay, so this kind of storytelling, this is, like I said before I read the comment, this is the gold standard. This is the type of thing that makes you picture the story in your head. And if you're familiar with the actual source material, you can picture it perfectly. Just know that the fans have the power to create. We don't need to rely on these big companies to create enjoyable content. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much for your content. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. And now for the actual questions. I did say this was a reading comments that was gonna double up as a Q&A, so don't be surprised that the questions are in the latter section of this video. But the first question comes from Just Vic, and Just Vic says, "Here's a question for your video. What is your favorite CNC and why?" At first, when I was first introduced, because it was the first game I played of Command and Conquer, that was Generals, and that was my favorite game. The gameplay was addicting. It was simplistic, but it was addicting. And I loved the sandbox. But when I got introduced to the Tiberium universe through a friend, at first I actually didn't like it. I didn't like the futuristic aesthetic, because Generals was my first entry. I thought it was such a big departure from what I had seen in that Command and Conquer that I wasn't a fan of it. Keep in mind that at this time I did not know that the Tiberium saga was separate from the Generals saga. I actually thought that Tiberium Wars was a sequel to Generals. And you might think that's ridiculous, but when we played the game and he was playing certain missions, when we got to Alexandria, not Alexandria, Kasabad, you can see Humvees in scrapyards. And I was like, okay, these must be the Humvees used by the United States faction from Generals. And when you saw the power plants from GDI, I was like, okay, this certainly looks like the power plant from China, and so maybe China and the United States joined together to fight the newly formed terrorist faction, the successor to GLA, NOD, because you know they had Scorpion tanks. So I naively thought that this was part of the same universe, so it wasn't. And after I learned that fact, I began to appreciate Tiberium Wars. So much so that I bought the game, I played through it, and then I went back and watched the cutscenes of other games, so I could get a better understanding of the story, and why things were the way that they were in Tiberium Wars and Kane's Wrath. But I never played the other titles, unfortunately, with the exception of Red Alert 3, which was just pure memes, and Red Alert 2 I did play some missions. I just couldn't get into the older games. Maybe it was because of the graphics, I don't know. I wanted to play the remaster that came out in 2020, but I'm gonna first buy a gaming PC and then I'll get into them. I want to play them properly. But I do know the story of what happens in those games, so. As it stands right now, with having played only 4 entries in the franchise, which is extensively having played Generals, extensively having played Tib Wars and Kane's Wrath, and having played Red Alert 3 and a bit of Red Alert 2, I can tell you that the one I enjoy the most is Tib Wars and Kane's Wrath, which I consider to be the same game because Kane's Wrath is just an expansion. Alright, and for the last question of this Q&A and reading comments, we have Asgarzir. The question is, would you ever make an Ion Storm ambiance? Well, this is gonna allow me to further develop the point I was trying to make earlier with the Tiberium Field ambiance. And here's the thing, the Tiberium Field and the Ion Storm are both elements of this universe. They will be featured in other ambiances, but they will not have an ambiance that's gonna be made just about them, because they're, let's say, natural occurring phenomena, and it would not make sense to just cover them when they're part of the landscape. For example, a red zone is gonna have a lot of Tiberium fields and a lot of ion storms. Now, I will make ambiances that don't have any human elements in them that could disrupt the experience of witnessing those. So they will be there, they just won't be the point of focus. So now that we've reached the end, I would like to thank you very much for actually sticking around throughout this old video. This was actually much longer than what I had intended. But I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank you for 300 subscribers. That's actually insane. It's insane that I'm actually at 300. I know that's not a big number, but Christ. This time last year, I only had 60, give or take. And 9 months ago, I only had 100. It has tripled from 9 months ago. And I suspect that 3 months from now, when it's been a year since 100, I'll be like at 400 or 500, and that's insane. So thank you very much. My goals with this channel will be many, but one of them is to discuss franchises that I love. And since Command and Conquer is a forgotten franchise, I will do my very best to spread the word. And I will do that because I will speak about other franchises that I love. Those people will come in, and hopefully they will actually become Command and Conquer fans as well. That's my hope, along with many other things that will be announced in the future. But thank you very much for sticking around. Thank you for all the questions. I hope you got the answers you were looking for. And having said thank you 1,000 times, I'm gonna close out this video. I'll see you all for the next ambiance, which is gonna be a very, very weird ambiance.